Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming to the EDC's Business Resilience Call. And thank you so much to Representative Ramel and Joe Timmons, the Governor Inslee's regional liaison to the Northwest region. So thank you so much for coming. And without further ado, I'd like to pass this to Representative Ramel for an update from the legislator. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for the invitation to join you today. So I think we make this pretty informal. It's a small group, and I think we can mostly just have a conversation. Joe Timmons in the governor's office is here too, and I think he wants to give an update on some of the sort of recent actions, I think around COVID-19 and hopefully housing and eviction protections and maybe some others. So I won't stray too far into that territory. I will just talk a little bit about what I'm anticipating for the coming legislative session that starts in January, and then happy to reserve most of our time for conversations and questions. So the best guess I have of sort of the two big questions we have about the legislative session that everybody likes to speculate about and nobody knows yet is transportation package and whether we're meeting in person. My guess is that we, given where things are at with the Delta variant and with protections that are still in place in Thurston County where the capital is, that we're going to follow those protections, and that probably means at most what I would call a hybrid session. Most of our meeting will probably continue to be in this format. I think for most of you, that's probably good news. One of the things we learned last year is that we can meet efficiently with people all over Washington State coming to give comments in our committee process. And instead of having to take a ferry and then drive 3 hours to talk for 3 minutes, you can zoom in at the appointed time, wait in line for a couple of minutes, give your testimony, and get back to the rest of your day. My hope is, and I will continue to advocate that, even when COVID is fully in the rearview mirror, that we'll continue to have that flexibility for folks. I think it's good for our democratic process. We get perspectives that we otherwise would not be able to get, and I think those perspectives help us make better decisions. But for this year, I will probably continue to be sitting here in my living room or somewhere else in Bellingham for most of the legislative session, as will most of the other legislators. The other big question that's sort of on everybody's mind right now is around the transportation package. If I were betting, I would bet that we will not pass a transportation package in a special session this fall. That's been discussed. If Congress fully gets its act together in the next week or so and passes sort of the full package, and we have federal investments in infrastructure to offset things that otherwise Washington State has to buy and pay for ourselves, then it makes the transportation package a lot easier for us to get done. And so if that were to happen, then we might. But my guess, reading tea leaves from Washington, is it's going to take them at least a few more weeks to move things along. Just speculating. I don't know anything that isn't in the newspaper, but that's my guess. And so with that sort of timeline sort of dragging out, my guess is that we'll be seriously talking about passing a transportation package during our regular session, starting in January. The reason that's relevant, if it isn't abundantly obvious, is because that's how we pay for replacement vessels in our ferry fleet. Right now, we are down to the bare minimum, arguably below the bare minimum, in terms of ferry vessels in the fleet. That lands most heavily on San Juan service. because it's the longest route that requires the most vessels to be able to maintain the service predictability. And so when there's vessels out of service.
There we go.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
So a high priority for all of us representing the 40th district and many other parts of Washington state is getting replacement vessels. We have one funded and paid for on the state's ferry long range plan, calls for 16 new vessels. I may have that number wrong. So over the next 16 years, we need approximately a vessel every 18 months. So that's about 10 new vessels need to be replaced. We're not on pace to do anything like what we need. So that is the top priority that I'm asking for in the transportation budget. In addition, I think we all know that ferry terminals need work, both on the Anacortes side and Lopez and Friday Harbor landings all need, and all of that also is paid for in the transportation budget. So we need to make a big investment in that package. My hope is that we'll be able to do that during the regular session. And again, I think that gets a lot easier with the passage of Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill from the U.S. Congress. The last two things I'll mention that, personally, I am working on continuing to advance climate policy. This last year, we passed an economy-wide price on carbon with the Climate Commitment Act. I think that does a great job of putting us on the path we need to be on, but it does independently and alone will not do what we need to do to reduce emissions, especially in the building sector, where once you've installed fossil fuel burning equipment, you're stuck using it for the long term, regardless of what the price on carbon is. So we want to continue to improve the building infrastructure. There's tons of opportunity for creating good jobs and investment in clean energy systems. So we'll be continuing to build on some steps that we took last year and advancing that policy. And then the other thing that I know is on a lot of folks' minds right now, I think it's less of an issue in San Juan County than maybe other parts of the 40th district, but it's still on folks' minds, is some of the police reform legislation, criminal justice reform legislation that we passed last year. I will say that I've had good conversations with San Juan County Sheriff on a couple of occasions about the way those bills are being interpreted and the impacts they're having. I think we have, over the last few months, done a good job of identifying where there's disagreement about what the policy should be between the legislature and the law enforcement community, and then where there's disagreement about what the policy says and what it does. And I think those are different questions that are sometimes hard to sort out. And so we've been doing the best we can to sort out where we just disagree about what we should be doing and where we disagree about what it does do. So that's been some work. Happy to dig into that if folks have questions on that, but I'll leave it there. So I guess turn it over to Joe. Do you want to give us some updates on recent actions from the governor's office?
Yeah, thanks, Representative Ramel, and sorry again for that hiccup on the recording. Good to be here with you all this morning. For those I haven't met, my name's Joe Timmons. I work in the governor's office. I'm part of the governor's outreach team. We have 6 of us around the state. So I work throughout Snohomish, Skagit, Whatcom Island, and San Juan counties. Happy to be a resource if ever helpful. So yeah, I mean, I guess, from my perspective, I'll just go over recent updates and then happy to field any sort of questions folks may have. We are still seeing this Delta variant is a real thing, and it's challenging across the state. From an epidemiological curve perspective, I was just looking a moment ago on the Department of Health's data dashboard, and the curve is starting to come down a little bit, which is promising. Hospitalizations as well. And that's really good news. But I should say, it's concerning. This is just the Delta variant that we're currently going through, and so really need to stay diligent in terms of trying to protect ourselves and our communities against this virus. So obviously, I think one of the biggest announcements in the last couple of months from our office has been the vaccination mandate requirement for folks working in schools, higher education, childcare settings, healthcare settings, and that is as well as statewide employees, I should say. And that timeline is for October 18th. So what that means is this coming Monday is the timeline where someone would need to have their second shot of Pfizer or Moderna to have the 2 weeks before October 18th, or their first shot of Johnson & Johnson, only shot of Johnson & Johnson, I should say. So we'll see. Very hopeful that folks will comply with that. And I know that that's been a big source of news around the state. Other than that, as Representative Ramel mentioned, on the housing front, the legislature allocated federal dollars for tenants and for landlords to help keep folks in their houses and in their rental units if they're unable to pay during the pandemic. And the governor had a bridge for his moratorium, for his eviction moratorium, that extended through the end of September. So I guess through today. And recently he extended that through the end of October. And this is really to help counties get funding out to those who need it so they can stay in their places of residence. And so we're hopeful that this extra month will really make a tangible difference in San Juan County and elsewhere around the state. If you haven't seen already, and I'm happy to provide a link, the Department of Commerce opened a new border relief fund. I'm kind of botching the name of it. Let me pull up the actual name here. It's another Working Washington grant, and it's called the Border Business Relief Program. It's eligible for businesses in 10 counties around the state, and San Juan County is one of those, for businesses that have been impacted from the prolonged border closure. Governor Inslee has consistently and most recently pleaded, frankly, with the federal administration to reopen the border. We feel like it's safe to do so at this time. The governor wrote a letter to President Biden last week urging a reopening, at least partial reopening. This is after news that folks would be able to enter the United States in November if they're vaccinated by air, but not by land. And so the governor feels that, if the administration thinks that it's safe enough for folks to enter by air, then we should still have that by land and help businesses around the border of our state and communities around the border of our state thrive. So that's something I wanted to pass along, that the border relief program, businesses are eligible up to $50,000 in relief. The application period begins on Monday, October 14th, and it's open through October 18th. And the Department of Commerce has staff available to help answer any questions about that. And there's a great FAQ page online as well. Those are really the main updates I have from my end, and happy to chat about anything related to that or other questions folks may have. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you both so much for coming. I'll throw to the floor for questions. And allow people to unmute themselves if people have questions. See, Deborah Hoskinson has a question. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, that took a bit. Sorry, I kept trying. Thank you both for being here. It's really great to have this time with you. And thank you, Representative Ramel, for mentioning the transportation package. So, as you know, the ferries are, our lifelines for our residents and our economy, including tourism, which I represent. And I sit on the Ferry Advisory Committee also. So I know you're doing something in general, but what are each of you doing? Like, can you give us more specifics? Because this is so important for our district and our islands.
Sure. And so there's kind of in my mind several different pieces, right? Because there is a short-term problem, which relates more to staffing than capital budget investments, right? The ferry service right now does not have enough people working for it to do the job that they're committed to. If somebody calls in sick, if they get a flat tire on the way to work, et cetera, we just end up with no slack in the system and a ferry gets delayed or canceled. And that's happening certainly in the San Juans. It's happening throughout the whole system though. We get the emails every time a ferry is canceled, and it's all the time right now. So one, we need to do a better job in the short term, in the immediate term, of retaining the employees that we have. There's typically a process where newer employees who don't have seniority can be let go when they switch over to the winter schedule. And we've secured Senator Lovelet in particular as chair of the Ferry Caucus has helped secure a commitment from the ferries that they're not going to let any employees go. I think that's the obvious decision. And we need to do a better job of sort of recruiting folks and in the sort of medium term, do a better job of recruiting folks and retaining them. I think we've identified that the first years as an employee in the ferry system are difficult because they don't give people a consistent schedule. You don't know which route you're going to be working on, which means you could have hours of travel before you start your day. And you don't know which shifts you're going to get from week to week. So we need to do a better job of just providing folks with some consistency. And that just means investing in people. So that's a short and medium term solution. As I said, the longer term solution is one, making sure we pass a transportation package. So that's the big picture goal. And two, making sure ferry service is prioritized within that. And so that's a subset of passing the transportation package. And then the last thing I'll mention is a piece that occurs to me makes a lot of sense. I don't think we have I don't have details to share yet, but I think we can be doing a better job of, as the state level, supporting the last mile transportation connections so that folks are able to use the ferries without a vehicle more frequently. We can carry a lot more passengers on ferries. And so, on the list of things, my predecessor had been looking at whether there's a possibility to have small vehicle rental. I think he was looking at electric cars rentals on either end so that you can walk on and rent a car on the other end. We could be looking to augment or support the ferry or the shuttle service on San Juan Island, the shuttle service on Orcas, and trying to just make it so that every ferry run that we have is able to carry, even though the number of cars is limited, the number of people we can increase there. So I'm going to be looking to create a budget proviso this year to figure out how the state can do a better job of supporting that and really just getting the most out of every ferry run that we do. So those are the pieces on my agenda right now.
Okay, do you think you can is it a problem of getting the vote from the non-ferry served counties for the budget, or like what's the hang up?
Well, so the couple of pieces to that hang up. Yeah. So the way the transportation funding is done in Washington State is that every few years, handful of years, last one was 2016, we vote on a package of revenue and a package of expenditures for plus or minus a decade or so. And so we in this case, we're sort of figuring out how big a package of revenue, and then what can we do with that much money. So the goal is to make sure that the package is big enough to be able to fund priorities that folks all over Washington State have. Replacing the Columbia River Bridge, for example, that's $1 billion off the top right there. So those kinds of things. And then, so we're trying to put together a package that gets enough votes. And it's unlike the operating budget in Washington. If we're bonding future revenue, we need a supermajority vote. So it needs to be bipartisan. And so we need to have Republican votes to, among other things, raise the gas tax. So that is a complicated thing to do. So it's two-step process. One is get a commitment that we're going to raise the revenue, and two, make sure our priorities are funded out of that revenue. And so our goal here, and the reason it's so valuable to have Senator Lovelight's leadership on the Ferry Caucus, is that we can try to hold together as a voting bloc and insist, if we're going to do this, we need to move forward with the investments in the marine highway system.
I see that Carson Springer has a question. Carson, you can unmute yourself. Okay.
Oh, there we are. Sorry, was not letting me. Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Joe. I'm actually driving on the ferry right now, so it's appropriate to talk a little bit about the ferry, and I appreciate your thoughts on the short-term and kind of long-term constraints of the system. And I wanted to chime in as a business owner, long-time business owner here in the San Juan. I work in the service industry and the critical infrastructure. We do line clearance, tree trimming, residential tree care, fuel reduction, and forest restoration, and have about 13 full-time employees. And yeah, I've been doing this for 16 years, and it's rough. It's hurting our bottom line, and it's hurting people that warm me. It's affecting their paychecks, and it's just tough. We rely on the mainland boats for supply, equipment, and repairs, and we do a lot of inter-island work. So yeah, I just kind of want to perspective and really try to push things forward and emphasize the need to work and address short-term fixes, whether that's for additional staff or implement that. And I hear this, friends and neighbors and others, business owners. So it's definitely a drag on our local economy and cause for just lots of stress. So appreciate your time.
Thanks. I think Victoria Compton was putting together a survey to try and evaluate the economic impact on businesses of the delays in the ferry service over the last few months. Amanda, if you have that, can you share that in the chat? And if folks aren't familiar with that or haven't seen it, would urge you to take that survey, because that's data that we need to be able to make the case to everybody else in Infield.
And if I may add in here too, Deborah, thanks for your question, and Carson, thanks for your insight. That's really informative. I'll just say too, I know this has been a uniquely challenging year for ferry service in the San Juans. Really recognize that, and Representative Ramel and Senator Loveligh and Representative Kanoff have really been diligent in raising issues with our office and state agencies, WashDOT, to raise concerns from San Juans. From our kind of timeline or perspective, the governor, our office is in the process now of putting together our supplemental budget. And so the first step of that really is taking agency requests for budget changes. And so we are reviewing, in the process of reviewing Ferry's budget request and Washington State Department of Transportation request. At this point, I'm not sure what's in that and what will come out in the fall, but I just want to say, you know, the governor's going to release his supplemental budget later this year to then go to the legislature as part of the process. And I'm happy to share his budget proposal with this group when it comes out as well. And we've heard loud and clear about staffing issue concerns and really appreciate folks continuing to raise that so we can help make that case too.
Does anyone else have any questions for Representative Ramel or Joe Timmons from the Inslee's office? I think the ferry is definitely one of the top concerns right now. Gail, while you're on, have you heard any other top concerns?
Not right offhand. Thinking here, ferries are probably the biggest topic going on right now. And we're just excited about the new grant that starts next week. So we're pushing that out, trying to get that out to everybody so they know. But other than that, I can't think of anything. Ferries are probably the biggest concern for everybody right now. It's just hurt so many facets of businesses and even just people trying to get off for medical. And so it's a trickle down effect for everybody for sure.
Thank you.
It's that message is not lost on us. I just want you all to know that, you know, we have heard this loud and clear. I've been on the islands a couple of times in the last few months, and so recognize from firsthand experience the challenges when the ferries are late or delayed, and can see how it, you know, affects your ability to get your workday done. Those of us, Senator Loveland, Deborah Kanoff, Representative Kanoff, and I are fully engaged in this process, and want to assure you that we're committed to trying to figure it out and advocating for those interests in the legislative process. And when, you know, that budget proviso I mentioned, I will have more details on that, and we'll share that out through the EDC once we're trying to figure out the details of what that looks like. I'm talking with folks at Ferry Services about that in the Department of Transportation next week, I think, Amanda, if not the week after that. And then the last thing I did not mention before and should have is the tax policy work group, and would encourage all of you to participate in one way or another in that process. So the Washington State, you probably have heard, has one of the most, if not the most, upside down tax codes in the country. What that means practically is that folks whose income is in the bottom 20% are paying a much higher percentage of their income than folks at the top of the income scale. And it's not fair, it's not right, and we ought to be moving to fix it. We have taken some steps to improve that, but really some of the challenges are structural. Our over-reliance on sales tax and property tax is always going to land more heavily on folks at the bottom end. And the B&O tax has a similar effect. And so a couple of years ago, the legislature initiated this process for evaluating a tax policy overhaul and looking at all of the components of our tax code and trying to see what changes could be made, how those would pencil out. Can we do that in a way that's systematic and gives folks confidence that we're not just raising taxes without a corresponding commitment to lower them somewhere else? I don't think we're trying to either inflate the state budget or shrink it. We're trying to keep the same level of service, but collect revenue in a more efficient and more fair way. And so the tax policy work group is doing a series of meetings around Washington State. And the ones for the Northwest corner here are next Monday, next Tuesday, the 5th. There's one in the afternoon and one in the evening, and would encourage folks here to participate in that. Learn a little bit more about what the tax policy work group is doing and to give comments. I think especially when talking to business owners, I certainly know that there's probably a lot of perspectives on, especially the B&O tax, but maybe some others as well. So would love to make sure that our community's voices are heard in that process, and encourage you to participate in that. Amanda, if you have it handy and can drop that in the chat, I would appreciate it. If not, I'll dig around for it.
Yeah, no, already in there, and it's actually Wednesday the 6th.
Thank you.
I'm excited to go to these, quite honestly. It's going to be really, really cool. This is something that's been talked about since 2001. And so we're actually making really, really good progress on it.
Well, thank you both for coming. If there are no more questions, we can end early, and want to give one more chance for people to ask questions if they have any, or add any other comments. All right, well, seeing none, I want to say thank you again to Representative Ramel and to Joe Timmons. And thank you all for coming. And like I said, we'll be putting this up online so that people who couldn't attend on live can see it later. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. It's good to see everybody.